At 72 years old, I stood in the back row of my own daughter's wedding and watched a man I barely knew walk her down the aisle. That man was her stepfather, a man she had known for 4 years, a man who had never once sat beside her hospital bed at 2 in the morning, never memorized the way she took her coffee, never learned which of her laughs was real and which one she used to protect herself. And yet there he was, center aisle, rented tuxedo, boutonniere perfectly placed, stepping into a moment that belonged to her father, and quietly, without ceremony, into the moment that had belonged to me. I did not make a scene. I have never been that kind of woman. I stood in my navy blue dress, the one I had pressed the night before with particular care, and I held my clutch purse with both hands and I smiled with everything I had. Because that is what you do when you love someone more than you love your own pain. But what I found inside my daughter's house 3 weeks later, something I was never supposed to see, did not just hurt me. It changed everything. My name is Margaret Ellen Calloway. I was born in Dayton, Ohio, in 1952, the middle child of 5. My mother canned peaches every August and sang hymns while she did the dishes. My father worked the line at a manufacturing plant for 31 years and never once called in sick. They did not have money, but they had standards, and they raised us to understand that those two things were not the same. I became a school teacher. 4th grade, for 28 years, at Riverside Elementary in Columbus, Ohio. I taught children to read, to add, to raise their hands before speaking, to try again when something was hard. I believed, and I still believe, that patience is not weakness, that calm is not defeat, that the quietest person in the room is very often the one who has understood the most. I met Robert Calloway in the summer of 1979 at a church picnic in July. He was tall and deliberate, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke and meant everything he said. We were married 10 months later in St. Andrew's Episcopal Chapel, the same chapel, as it happens, where my daughter would stand 43 years later and arrange me into the 3rd row from the back. Robert was a civil engineer, methodical, careful. He kept his files organized by year and category, read every document twice before signing, and believed that being prepared was one of the deepest forms of love. We built our life in a yellow house on Clover Street with a maple tree out front that went the most extraordinary shade of orange every October. We were not wealthy, but we were solid. The way a well-built house is solid, you don't notice it until you need to lean on it. We had 2 children, Daniel, born in 1984, and Cassandra, Cassie, born in 1987, our girl. Cassie was fire from the beginning. Strong opinions, a laugh that filled every room, absolutely certain she was right about everything until the moment she wasn't. And even then, she'd argue for another 10 minutes just on principle. Robert used to say she got her stubbornness from me, which I denied every single time, and we both knew I was lying. I loved her the way you love something you grew yourself, with pride and worry and a tenderness so deep it sometimes felt like grief. Robert was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in the fall of 2019. He was gone by February of 2020, 11 weeks from diagnosis to burial. 11 weeks. And I want you to understand what that means, because if you have loved someone for 40 years, you know that 11 weeks is not enough time to say what needs to be said. I tried. I sat beside him in that hospital room, and I held his hand, and I talked, and I still ran out of time. After he passed, I did what women like me do. I kept going. I tutored students on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. I tended my garden. I went to church and to the farmer's market, and I learned, slowly, painfully, to cook for one, which is a grief nobody warns you about. The silence of setting 1 plate instead of 2. Daniel called every Sunday like clockwork. Cassie called when she remembered, which was less often after she met Brandon. Brandon Holt came into Cassie's life in the spring of 2021. He was 35, worked in real estate development, wore expensive shoes, and had the kind of practiced charm that I had learned, over 72 years of living, to be careful around. He was handsome and polished and spoke with great confidence about money, which is a thing I have noticed ambitious people do when they want you to stop asking questions. I tried to like him. I genuinely tried. I invited him to Sunday dinners. I asked about his work. I listened to him talk. But there was something in the way his eyes moved around my house, around the rooms, the ceilings, the property, that felt less like admiration and more like appraisal. I couldn't prove it. I had nothing to point to. So I kept my unease to myself, and I smiled, and I passed the bread. Cassie was in love, so I swallowed what I felt, and I focused on what I hoped. The engagement was announced at Christmas 2022. The wedding was set for June 2023. And almost from the moment the ring went on her finger, something in Cassie began to shift. It started quietly. Phone calls becoming shorter, visits less frequent. A new tone when she spoke to me, slightly impatient, slightly elsewhere, as if I had become a task to be managed rather than a person she was talking to. I told myself it was planning stress. I told myself it was the natural way of things, a daughter building her own world. I told myself whatever I needed to tell myself to keep my heart from seeing what my mind was starting to understand. I should have listened sooner. The seating conversation happened 7 weeks before the wedding. Cassie came over on a Thursday, which was unusual. She sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold in front of her and a manila folder she kept touching without opening. I set lemon cookies between us and waited, because I have been a teacher long enough to know that silence is sometimes the most useful thing you can offer. "Mom," she finally said, "Brandon and I have been talking about the seating for the ceremony." "Of course," I said. "What are you thinking?" She opened the folder. Inside was a diagram of St. Andrew's, the chapel where Robert and I had stood 43 years ago, where I still knew every window and every pew by heart. Her finger moved across the paper with a practiced calm that told me she had rehearsed this moment. "We're doing mixed seating," she said. "No bride's side, no groom's side. Very relaxed. People sit wherever they're comfortable." "That sounds lovely," I said. "Right." A pause. "So because it's not traditional, we thought the front rows could be reserved for the most immediate family. Brandon's parents, his grandmother, she's flying in from Phoenix, and she has mobility issues, his sister, and her husband." I looked at the diagram. There was a small penciled star on the diagram, left side, 3rd row from the back. "Is that where you'd like me?" I asked. She didn't look up from the paper. "It's actually a really beautiful view from the middle section, Mom. And you know how your hip has been bothering you. You won't have to stand up as many times during the processional. Cassandra." She looked up. I held her gaze for a long moment. I didn't fill the silence with accusation or tears. I simply looked at my daughter and let her see that I understood exactly what was happening. "It's just seating," she said. Her voice was very careful. "Of course," I said. I did not argue. I refilled her tea. I offered another cookie. I walked her to the door 20 minutes later as if the afternoon had been perfectly ordinary. And when her car had turned the corner and disappeared from view, I stood in my kitchen and I put both hands flat on the counter and I breathed. That night I sat in Robert's chair, the one I had never moved or recovered, the one that still held the shape of him somehow. And I let myself feel the full, specific weight of what my daughter had done. She had drawn me a diagram. She had shown me, in pencil and paper, exactly where I ranked. And the distance between my star and the front row was not measured in pews. I thought about what Robert used to say when something troubled him deeply. "Margaret, let people show you who they are, and then decide what to do with that information." I sat with that for a long time. And then I began to decide. The wedding was June 17th, a Saturday. The kind of perfect blue sky day that has no idea what it's hosting. I wore my navy dress. I sat in the 3rd row from the back, on the left side, exactly where the star had been. I watched Pastor Gilmore, Robert's old friend, a man who had preached at Robert's funeral, stand at the altar where Robert and I had made our promises to each other. I watched Brandon's mother settle into the front pew in a blush pink suit with a corsage the size of a small bouquet. I watched Brandon's stepfather, a man I had never met, take my daughter's arm at the back of the aisle. I watched Cassie walk toward her future. She was beautiful. I want that to be said plainly and without condition, separate from everything else that happened. My daughter was the most beautiful bride I had ever seen, and the sight of her in that light, in that dress, made my chest ache with a love that had no logic and no limit and no interest in what she had done to me. That love just existed, the way the maple tree existed, whether I tended it or not. I smiled at the right moments. I cried quietly during the vows, and the woman beside me squeezed my hand and said these things always got her too, and I thanked her and did not explain. I was seated at table 11 at the reception. There were 12 tables. I ate my chicken marsala. I danced once with Daniel, who held me close and said, "I'm sorry, Mom," into my hair, which told me he had noticed and that he already knew. I kissed Cassie's cheek in the receiving line and told her she was radiant, and every word of it was true. I drove home at 9:30. I hung my navy dress carefully. I went to bed. I told myself it was finished. I told myself I would find a way to adjust. I told myself all the things we tell ourselves when we are not yet ready to act. 23 days later, the invoice arrived. It came by email on a Tuesday morning. The subject line was cheerful: final balance. Callaway Holt reception, June 17th. The amount was $14,340. Cassie's note below it was brief. "Mom, the venue needs final payment by the 15th. Can you handle this one? We're a little stretched from the honeymoon. Love you." I read it twice. Then I set my coffee cup down on the counter and stood very still for a moment. I had already paid for the flowers. $2,800. The photographer's deposit, $1,500. The bridesmaid's luncheon, $620. The dress alterations, which Cassie had asked me to handle as just one small thing, $340. A cash gift of $5,000 at Christmas specifically designated for wedding expenses. My own travel to the rehearsal dinner in Savannah, which no one had offered to cover. Nearly $11,000. Before this invoice, I had paid nearly $11,000 to sit in the third row from the back at table 11. And now she wanted $14,000 more. I opened my email. I typed one word. No. I pressed send. Then I did something I had not done in 4 days of sitting with this quietly. I picked up my phone and I called my son. Daniel arrived at my house within the hour. He sat at the same kitchen table where Cassie had shown me the diagram, and I told him everything, calmly, in order, the way I would present information to a classroom. The seating conversation. The penciled star. Table 11. The $11,000. The invoice. The one word I had sent. When I finished, my son was quiet for a long time. "Mom," he said. I didn't know about the seating. I know. He rubbed his face with both hands. "Brandon's been pushing her. I've seen it. The way he talks to her about family obligations and financial planning and..." He stopped. I didn't think it had gotten this far. "Daniel," I said, "I need to ask you something honestly." "Anything. Has Brandon ever said anything to you about the house?" He looked up at me. Something shifted behind his eyes, a flash of discomfort he tried to contain. "Why do you ask?" I told him then about the feeling I'd had, the way Brandon's eyes moved around the rooms, the assessment quality of his attention when he thought no one was watching. It was nothing I could prove, just the accumulated evidence of intuition built over 72 years. Daniel was quiet again. Then he said, carefully, "About 3 months ago, Brandon mentioned something about estate planning. Said it was important for families to have these conversations while everyone was healthy. Said he'd done some research on property values in your neighborhood. I absorbed that. He framed it as concern," Daniel added. "I thought he was just being practical. Perhaps he was," I said, though neither of us believed that. That night, I did not sleep well. And in the morning, I did something I should have done sooner. What happened next came from an accident. A small, ordinary accident of the kind that changes everything. Cassie had asked me, 2 months before the wedding, if I would store some boxes at my house while she and Brandon reorganized their apartment ahead of the move. Of course I had said yes. I had stacked them neatly in the spare bedroom and forgotten about them entirely. 3 weeks after the invoice, a Wednesday morning, early September, I went into that room to retrieve a box of Robert's books I'd been meaning to donate. I moved one of Cassie's boxes aside, and the lid slipped. Papers fanned across the floor. I knelt to gather them, and then I stopped. The document on top was a printout. A real estate market analysis. Professional, formatted, the kind a developer might commission. It was dated 4 months earlier. The property address at the top was mine, my house, 412 Clover Street, Columbus, Ohio. The estimated current market value was listed clearly, $497,000. Beneath it were handwritten notes. Not Cassie's handwriting, Brandon's. I had seen it on birthday cards, on a check he'd once written at my table. The note said, "Probate timeline, consult, sole deed holder, M. Callaway, Transfer options post-estate. I sat down on the floor of that spare bedroom with those papers in my hands. Sole deed holder. M. Calloway. Transfer options post-estate. He was not planning for Cassie's future. He was planning for my house. I put the papers back exactly as I had found them. I stacked the box. I straightened the lid. Then I went to the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea, and sat down at the table with my hands folded and my mind working in the precise, methodical way that Robert had always admired and that I had always simply thought of as how I processed things. Let people show you who they are, and then decide what to do with that information. The next morning I called Patricia Nguyen. Patricia had been my attorney since Robert's passing, a small, brilliant woman in her 50s with an office full of organized files and the particular manner of someone who has heard everything and is surprised by nothing. I had worked with her through Robert's estate, through the deed transfer, through the updating of my will. She knew my financial situation completely. I did not call her upset. I called her informed. I drove downtown that Thursday and sat across from her clean oak desk, and I laid out everything. The seating, the invoice, the boxes, the printout, the notes in Brandon's handwriting. I put it all on the table in the order it had happened, the way you lay out evidence, which I was beginning to understand was exactly what it was. Patricia did not interrupt. She read the printout carefully, then set it down and looked at me over her reading glasses. "Margaret," she said, "how much do you know about your own estate right now?" I knew the basics. The house, my retirement savings, Robert's life insurance proceeds. Split equally between Daniel and Cassie in my existing will, with amounts set aside for each grandchild. "Let me tell you what Brandon Holt knows," Patricia said. What she laid out in the next 40 minutes rearranged my understanding of what had been happening in my own family for the past 2 years. The house. My yellow house on Clover Street, where I had lived for 40 years, where Robert and I had raised our children, where the maple tree turned orange every October, was worth nearly $500,000. I owned it outright. No mortgage, no liens, no complications. In my current will, upon my death, half of that would transfer to Cassie. And if Cassie and Brandon were married, which they now were, then under Ohio law, Brandon would have legal claim to those marital assets. "He's not after Cassie's inheritance," Patricia said quietly. "He married into position for it." I sat with that. The room was very quiet. Through Patricia's window, I could see the street below. Columbus going about its Tuesday business, entirely indifferent to the fact that my world had just rearranged itself. "What are my options?" I asked. Patricia almost smiled. "That," she said, "is exactly the right question." What she told me next was not dramatic. It was not the stuff of movies. It was simply the language of preparation. The same language Robert had always spoken, the language of someone who reads every document twice and keeps their files organized by year. I could update my will entirely. I could establish a revocable living trust that would transfer the house to Daniel outright upon my death, bypassing Cassie's share. Or I could restructure the distribution in ways that protected the asset without severing the relationship. I could set up protected educational trusts for future grandchildren that Brandon could never touch. I could, in short, make every decision that was legally mine to make, because the house was mine, the money was mine, and I was 72 years old and in perfectly good health, and no one, not Brandon Holt, not a real estate market analysis, not a set of handwritten notes about probate timelines, could do a single thing about any of it without my signature. I drove home slowly that afternoon. I drove past Riverside Elementary, where I had taught for 28 years, past the church where Robert and I had married, past the farmer's market, past all of it with the particular clarity that comes from understanding, finally and completely, what you are dealing with. I was not angry. I want to be precise about that. What I felt was something older and steadier than anger. It was the feeling of someone who has been patient for a long time and has decided that patience, in this instance, no longer means waiting. I did not call Cassie that week. Or the week after. She called me. 3 times. I let it go to voicemail twice. The 3rd time, I answered. "Mom!" Her voice was tight, controlled. "I don't understand what's happening." "I know," I said. You sent 1 word. You didn't explain. You haven't called. I don't know what to do with that. I'd like to come over," I said. "Saturday afternoon. Just you and me. A pause. Brandon will be home." I know, but I'd like it to be just you and me. Another pause. Okay, she said. I arrived at their apartment on Saturday at 2 o'clock with nothing in my hands. No baked goods, no peace offering, no props. I sat down across from my daughter in her living room, and I looked at her the way I had looked at her across the kitchen table with the diagram between us, steadily, without performance. I told her about the boxes. I told her calmly, in plain language, what I had found. The printout. The market analysis. The address at the top, which was my address. The notes in her husband's handwriting about probate timelines and deed transfers. Cassie went very still. I'm not telling you this to destroy your marriage, I said. I'm telling you because you are my daughter, and you deserve to know what is happening in your own life. Mom, her voice broke. I didn't know. I believe you, I said. And I did. But I need you to understand something. I have made some decisions. Legal decisions with Patricia that protect this family's assets going forward. Those decisions are already made. They cannot be undone without my signature, which I will not give. She stared at me. I am not punishing you, Cassie. I am protecting us both. And I need you to ask Brandon, in private, why he had a market analysis done on my house 4 months before your wedding. The silence in that room was the loudest thing I had heard in years. What happened next unfolded over weeks, not days, because real life does not move at the speed of a revelation. It moves at the speed of people deciding, slowly and painfully, what they are willing to face. Cassie asked Brandon. I don't know exactly how that conversation went. I was not there. What I know is that 3 days later, Cassie called me and cried for 40 minutes on the phone. Not the controlled crying of someone performing grief, but the raw, unwinding kind, the kind that sounds like something loosening. She said she had found other things. An email thread on his laptop, which she had not gone looking for but had come across by accident, the way I had come across the papers in the box. Conversations with his business partner about the Columbus property market. About timing. About patience. He was waiting, she said. He was just waiting. I did not say I had known. I did not remind her of the Sunday dinners where I had tried to like him, or the unease I had swallowed for her sake. None of that mattered now. What do you need from me? I asked. I don't know yet, she said. That's okay, I said. I'm not going anywhere. Brandon and Cassie separated in November. The divorce was filed in February of the following year. I will not pretend that was easy for my daughter, because it was not. Divorce is grief, even when it is the right thing, even when you are the one who chose it. I drove to her apartment and sat with her on nights when she didn't want to be alone. I brought soup and I brought silence in equal measure, whichever she needed. I did not say I told you so, because I am not that kind of mother. I am the other kind, the kind that stays. In the spring, Cassie came to Sunday dinner, just her, the way it used to be before everything. She sat at the same kitchen table she had always sat at, and I made pot roast because it had been Robert's favorite, and I had been making it on Sunday afternoons for 40 years, and I saw no reason to stop. We talked about ordinary things for a long time. Her job. Daniel's kids. The maple tree, which had come through the winter well and was just beginning to bud. And then she put her fork down and looked at me. I need to say something, and I need to say it right, she said. I waited.
I put you in the third row from the back. Her voice was steady, the steadiness of someone who has practiced. I let Brandon's family take the front. I let you pay for things and sit at table 11, and I told myself it was just logistics, just seating, just practical. I told myself that because it was easier than admitting what I was doing. I did not look away from her. I was taking you for granted, she said. I was taking you the way people take things that have always been there, like the house is always there, like the maple tree is always there, like you'll always be there. Her voice cracked slightly and she held it. And I'm sorry, Mom. I am so sorry. I reached across the table and I took her hand. I know, I said. Are we okay?
I thought about Robert, about 11 weeks and running out of time and the things you never finish saying. I thought about 28 years of fourth graders and the patience it takes to believe that people can learn. I thought about a yellow house on a quiet street where the maple tree turned orange every October without being asked, without any promise of appreciation, simply because that was its nature. We're going to be okay, I said. But Cassie, we have to be honest with each other now. We don't get to go back to comfortable. We have to go forward to real. She nodded. She was crying, but she was nodding. Then yes, I said. We're okay. I am 72 years old. I was a school teacher for 28 years and a wife for 40 and a mother for every single day since 1984, and I have learned, over the long, careful accumulation of a life, that the most important thing is not whether people hurt you. People hurt each other. That is the oldest and most human story there is. The most important thing is what you do with the truth when you find it. I found it in a spare bedroom on an ordinary Wednesday morning. I found it in a box that was never supposed to be opened, in papers that were never meant for me. And I sat on that floor with those pages in my hands, and I made a choice. Not a dramatic one, not a loud one, but the kind of choice that quiet people make when they are finally done being underestimated. I did not scream. I did not perform. I called my lawyer, and I protected what was mine, and I told my daughter the truth. That was all. That was everything.
Patricia helped me finalize the updated estate plan in December. The house is now held in a revocable living trust. There are educational accounts established for future grandchildren that are legally protected and cannot be accessed by any future spouse of either of my children without a court order. Everything is documented, organized, and filed by Yeard Eye, the way Robert always kept things, the way he taught me to keep things. Daniel knows everything and has said more than once that his father would have handled it exactly the same way. I think he's right. I think Robert would have been methodical and unhurried and very, very clear. Cassie is doing the difficult work of rebuilding. It is slow. It is not linear. But she is doing it, which is all you can ask of anyone.
And I am here, in my yellow house on Clover Street, where the maple tree stands in the front yard and turns orange every October with magnificent indifference to everything that has happened beneath it. I drink my coffee in the morning by the kitchen window. I tutor students on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. I go to church on Sundays. I tend my garden. I am not a woman who was hidden at her daughter's wedding. I am Margaret Ellen Calloway, and I have been here all along. The people who underestimate quiet women always forget one thing. We have been watching and listening and learning and waiting, and we keep every single receipt. Kindness without boundaries is a door left unlocked. I locked mine, and I kept the key.